Paltrocast.
Ira, my first question besides how are you? Um, what are the years that you lived in Freeport? Because from what I understand, you're in Amherst, Massachusetts these days.
Right. My family lived on the North Shore of Long Island in Searingtown.
Hmm.
My father bought in with Tina Barasch.
Hmm.
In 1959, I was six. And so I worked in the store through those years, but still lived on the North Shore. I did live in Freeport by myself as a bachelor from 70, uh, from 70, let me see here, 76, 1976. I lived on Brooklyn Avenue for a
Hmm.
year and then got engaged and moved to Queens. But I worked as an adult in the store for 17 years as partner with my parents.
Sure. Now, before we get into the store history, establishing who you are, you have a recent ebook, you're a cartoonist, you're a coach, you're a mentor, etc. But when someone says, "What does Ira do for a living?" or "Who are you?" Do you have an easy answer for that?
I help leaders grow. Most leaders are from family businesses in my case, but I've also dealt with other kinds of partnerships and nonprofits and things like that through coaching, through
Mhm.
assessments. But I would say family business helper or facilitator.
Which ties us in a great way with Barish's family business. Do I have it correct that it was the oldest children's wear store in the US for a while?
Yes. So we were founded in 1902
Hmm.
when most people made their children's clothes at home.
Hmm.
And my cousin, Harry Barasch, was the founder, generations older than me. I was the fourth generation. Uh,
Hmm.
and he was a peddler that would walk from the Lower East Side to the Hamptons every week to Montauk,
Wow.
carrying a refrigerator-sized bag of goods made from mattress ticking, that heavy, material, and he was kosher, so he would either find a Jewish family to eat with, or he'd live on hard-boiled eggs. And then after years of that, after coming from Austria, he put the sack
Hmm.
down in front of 61 South Main Street and bought the building, which was five stores and five apartments for $5,000. And his landsman from Austria said he was the merchant prince for spending that much money on a building. And yeah, so it was the oldest kids' fashion magazine, which was an insert in Earnshaw's, wrote us up and asked at the end of the article, is it true that Barish's is the oldest? And other people were like, we're 20, we're 30. At the time, we were 75. We made it to 90.
Hmm. And do I have it correct that the building was bought for those $5,000 in 1902?
Yes.
Got it. Do you have a lot in general, a lot of archival photos of the family? Because obviously cameras were not prevalent in the early 20th century like they are today.
I mean, I mostly have one picture of Harry Barish standing in front of the store in
Hmm.
1920 in a thick wool suit, probably an eight-piece suit, looking very stern. The guy that used to fix the glass in front of our store, Bob Rayner, was the village historian, and he helped me figure out that the reflection in the glass showed the Vaudeville Theater on the other side of Sunrise Highway, and
Hmm.
other things that was like this was before they expanded down Newton Boulevard. So all I know about him is that picture, but plus that he founded Temple B'nai Israel and was president. He was the president of the chamber. He founded Playland Park, which they used to call Coney Island of the East, which burnt down in the 30s. And actually,
Hmm.
the historian Regina Feeney at Freeport Historical just showed me an article from the Brooklyn Eagle where he took a calliope from Playland Park and dragged it to a KKK rally in Freeport and disrupted the rally. And he's only identified in the article as Harry Barish, a Jew. Doesn't say like Playland Park or Barish's or anything.
Sure. So tying that in, uh, current demographics aside, from what I understand, Freeport had rich Jewish roots and had rich Greek roots, which we'll talk about. But you mentioned a family member was tied in with an early congregation, a Jewish congregation in Freeport.
Right. So that was the founder, Harry Barish. He was the first generation, the peddler. and then the business went to his two sons, and then to the widow of the second to die of the two sons, and then my father came in with her for 17 years. But yeah, he was an early Jewish settler. I now live in Amherst, Mass, and I'm fascinated with tours of historic Northampton, Massachusetts, but I also tie it back to Freeport, the
Hmm.
same era where a lot of the merchants on Main Street or in Freeport, South Main Street, were Jewish merchants because they were not allowed to own land at that time. So I really have to correlate that with him buying the building for 5 grand, which is what I had always heard. Maybe he bought it later. I don't know. But a lot of them went into textiles because that was considered a feminine thing to do. So we'll let Jewish men do that. So that's why, the whole schmata business, according to the Northampton Historical Society. So he fit right in there as a Jewish merchant and founded the temple and founded Playland Park, which again burnt down in the 30s. Everything burnt down in the 30s.
So the family that was bought in 1902, the building rather, that was bought by Harry, was that part of Freeport Mall or considered part of Freeport Mall or
South
close to
Main Street.
Freeport?
South Main Street. So, I mean, the Freeport Mall came later in my time. It was put in 76. Um, and that's a whole other story. I was on part of the committee just as I entered the business to see, is this a good idea?
Sure.
And they would say, well, look at Ithaca, New York, look at Santa Monica, California. Well, wherever you put them in thriving, wealthy areas, they did well. Whenever you put it into places that had some urban and poverty issues, it did poorly. But he bought on South Main Street, which I had heard when I was even growing up in the store. I would hear from elderly customers that, like, when I was young, we would get all dressed up and promenade down South Main Street in Freeport. And it was the place to be. And, I think if I had 3 wishes, I would wish to go back and see that.
The way you're describing it, it reminds me of Asbury Park, New Jersey, where it's this destination town. Is that off base to say that Freeport had that destination vibe until maybe the late 70s or early 80s?
Yes, it was one of the key towns, Westbury, Hempstead, uh,
Hmm.
Islip, Lindenhurst. There were big old towns with good bones. Freeport had good bones.
Sure. So the town has evolved, which we've talked about, which we're going to go more into. But in reading some research and some notes, I see that there was Greek history within the local area. Does that come from a couple of families populating heavily and coming over, or is it almost like a Greek town that Freeport had?
Well, I mean, at least in my time in Barash's, Freeport won several awards for being particularly well integrated. There was a town in Illinois that the whole thing was named after that I'm forgetting. Um, but yeah, we had more Hispanic, Latino ethnic groups than any other. But Greeks, there were the people from Chios that normally were support services for diners and restaurants. They would rent the uniforms and the mats when you come in and sell the coffee. And then there were the people from Sparta who were much
Mhm.
wealthier. They were the diner owners, some professionals, and they all shopped in our store. They all knew each other. I mean, it was, very kind of economically divided of who shopped with who. I mean, I think our most loyal customers were more the Chios women who would come in with their kids, and the kids would speak English and they wouldn't. And I knew, like, a few phrases in Greek, which made at least Miss Leodakis and Miss Skiriotis think I was Greek. And, how come you no come to church? And I'd say, I'm not Greek. I mean, I know how to say, I have to charge you sales tax and Happy Christmas, Merry, and no, we are cheap too. Um, but yeah, it was a loyal population, and I would love to go to Greek fairs and see customers there. And I would love to see what Yanni and John and Stephen are doing, who were great negotiators for their mother and aunt. I'm
So
sure
were there Greek churches or congregations in Freeport?
Freeport and Merrick, all this South towns had Greek festivals in the church parking lot in the summers. I mean, it might still be that way. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say it is along those lines
Yeah.
and all that. And that ties in with to play into stereotypes and positive stereotypes. the Imperial Diner. I'm not sure if that was originally a Greek-owned diner, but I'm guessing that that was there through your years at Barish's.
Oh yeah. No, and I would eat there on occasion, but also I remember you'd come in the front entrance and then you would go one booth to the right, and there would be Ira and Rhoda Keller that owned the Freeport Leader for many years. We were good friends with them. And you'd say hello and how you doing? And Ira would always say miserable, which was like a five hat rating for him. And Rhoda would ask, is it true that so and so is opening or closing or whatever it is? Yeah, it was a nice diner. I think it was Greek owned. I'm thinking Belucas family, but I'm not sure.
Got
That's
it. So,
owned.
in terms of restaurants, was that a big part of your Freeport existence as well? Because people dine out more than ever nowadays, I find. There's food trucks and you can have anything delivered at any time. And dining out was more of a treat back then. But I would have to assume, as a business person, a lot of the breaking bread was over meals dining out.
Well, I mean, I also, we lived on the North Shore, but I grew up working in Barish's on weekends and holidays and all my aunts and uncles and all that. And it was a treat for us to go to Woodcleft. We were Jewish, but we ate seafood out, not really observant kosher, but, I
Sure.
don't think we didn't make lobster at our house, but, on Woodcleft, everything was permitted. And then later there were chamber meetings there. We had, sales help who, they'd call up and say, it's high tide and a full moon and I can't come to work without a rowboat and, things like that. I did like the restaurants. Also, my wife is Cuban and we started dating back then. And so I liked a lot of the either Puerto Rican or Dominican restaurants that sprouted up around.
So bring it back to Barish's. I
Yeah.
read that Barish's had its own currency. I'm using air quotes right now. Barish bucks.
Yeah.
Were they actual paper printed out things?
Yeah, they imitated. My father called the FBI and asked what the laws are. And they were saying, no, it's fine. You can do whatever you want. He's like, but it's going to look like a dollar bill. And then they said, it's okay. And he would be like, so it won't have like Gerald Ford. It'll have like Mickey Mouse. And then the FBI said, what's the difference? So, yeah, a kid would spend $10 and get 10 Barish bucks, and people would save thousands of them. I mean, the kids were obsessed with them. And even I just posted some pictures of some Barishes and Freeport stuff um, on the Freeport Facebook page. And this one woman was like, I had 1,000 Barish bucks when you closed, and I could have gotten 100 more and gotten a ventriloquist dummy. That was the best prize. And it's like, I am so sorry if this has made your life difficult. And if I ever get to know you, I'll buy you a dummy. But yeah, it was great. And I mean, we'd buy the dummies, we'd buy the salesman samples from, his station wagon that would pull up on Newton. But otherwise, it was really, I was the buyer of boys and my mother was girls. And then was buyer of everything, but I was the buyer of the toys, which was really a lot of fun and figuring out, 60 bucks should be like a decent checkers set. Like what's not going to feel like a ripoff to kids. And then also just doing these little focus groups on what kinds of things do you think you'd save for. That was interesting.
So if you're doing a loyalty program like that, that implies that as a business, it was a place that people didn't just shop at once or twice, that is a regular part of the community. Was a lot of Freeport like that back then?
I think it was one of those towns. I mean, now that I live in Western Mass, I know which towns that people grow up and stay there. In
Hmm.
Western Mass, definitely Westfield, Agawam, East Hampton, Chicopee. But Freeport was one of those towns that people would grow up and stay there. And even when I put the thing on Facebook, there were a couple of people that were like, I actually had one person that identified themselves like 15 years ago of like, I'm Bobby, and you might remember me as I had six older sisters, and my mother worked in the hospital thrift shop around the corner. I certainly remember. And he said, now I'm trans. I am Aunt Barbara. And he says, and I know your mother's name was Barbara. I'm aware of that. And I am now the most successful Tupperware salesperson in the United States. And she just puts on a show. Um, and so it's interesting. Yeah, we definitely got to know our customers. We had Mr. Zip was a chimp that would buy stuff.
This is that's a topic I do want to come back to,
Yeah.
Zippy the chimp. I assume Mr. Zip, Zippy the Chimp,
Yeah,
one and the
same
same?
person. Yep, same primate.
Same primate. Yeah, so Zippy the Chimp, it's one of those things where I know hundreds of television appearances, an absolute celebrity was living in Freeport, but maybe the legacy management did not keep up. So meaning future generations don't really know who
Yeah,
Zippy the Chimp is. But am I correct that Zippy the Chimp lived in a house near the Nautical Mile?
yes. And the couple that owned them was an older couple that trained him. There were several of them because he would always complain when you'd see that he would be feisty. He was hitting his teen years, and they would have to, I don't know what they would do with the teenage monkeys, and then they'd get a new one. So I think they always had one in a bedroom for training, and then he had his own bedroom. But you could see when they got older, he'd come in roller skating, and he'd have a sweatshirt, Mr. Zip, or Zip, it would just say Zip, and then he would take candy and ice cream cones from kids and swing on the. He was not particularly well behaved, and I remember this one time they would particularly like when we would get this kind of suit that was like a little plaid boy's vest with a shirt and tie, and then pants with a stretch waist, and occasionally it would be like broken stock, like a seven top with a four toddler bottom, and I'd call them and it would be like I have the perfect pants because he didn't have much of a waistline. And he wore it on Johnny Carson. And I think he wore it the day that he squeezed Johnny's hand too hard and got dismissed during a commercial. They went to commercial. So he definitely was a customer of ours.
Am I hearing correctly? There were several Zippy the Chimps, the way
Yeah,
that a childhood dog might pass away, and they name the next dog that, and people don't really put two and two together that they were different dogs.
right. Yes.
Do
But in this
people
case, they didn't live out their career. You know, once they hit adolescence, they were, I don't know, a stud in a farm upstate or something.
right, right? Another celebrity that I know that you crossed paths with was Guy Lombardo, or at least his wife.
His wife. Yeah.
Where in town did Guy Lombardo's wife live? Do you recall that?
Well, I mean, in the heyday, I would imagine that she lived in their house at the end of Guy Lombardo Avenue,
Mhm.
which I think was sinking in my day. I don't know if it's still there or not. But the story that I remember, and it was earlier in my time, so it was kind of like I was eavesdropping with her telling my father, but that she had gone into, kind of upscale car dealer number one, and they didn't know who she was, and she dressed a little informally or shabbily, at least that day, and they kind of did not treat her well, and she went across the street and bought a fully loaded whatever upscale brand number two, and then said, I'm paying with cash, and please call across the street and tell them that Mrs. Guy Lombardo. So, I heard that from her when I was much younger. I think it's true. I mean, Eddie Murphy also came in our store when he was a big deal, when he first got on Saturday Night Live, because he lived in Roosevelt. And then I think complained. He bought a house on a regular block to be a regular guy, and then complained when he had all these teenagers riding bikes in front of his house in a circle. So I think then he moved to New Jersey to a mansion.
That sounds about right. A lot of celebrities have either moved there in their later years, after they became prominent, or grew up there, etc. Anybody that you recall from your upbringing of note, or besides the people we've talked about, for example, Shelley Peiken, who co-wrote Christina Aguilera songs, or
I saw your interview with her. That was a very good interview.
thank you, thank you. Is that a
People were
last?
equally interested in her work at Margot and Frank's and her work writing songs for famous musicians.
Well, she was from there. I mean, Lou
Yeah.
Reed is from here as well.
Right.
Do you remember hearing anything
I have a
about
Lou
Lou
Reed
Reed?
story. Well, I shouldn't tell you the Lou Reed story. Well, okay. I'll let somebody else that you know tell the Lou Reed story. But Howard Stern, I have an interesting story about Howard Stern, who grew up in
Please.
Roosevelt and claims to be the last white family of white flight to Rockville Center. But he and my father both lived on the North Shore and both went to my father went there with me when I was little to Vic Tanny's, and it became the North Shore Health Club, and Howard Stern went there. And there was more than a couple of times that Howard Stern and my father took showers in adjoining stalls and got into a conversation. So there was the one time and my father and I would listen to Howard Stern in the back when it wasn't busy, And there was the one time that my father complained to him that there was a rap star called Africa Bombata, and Howard
Yes.
Stern had created a character called Freeport Bombata, and then was making fun of Freeport. And he also talks about eating at V-Brox and all kinds of stuff with his parents. And my father told him to stop using the Freeport Bombata character because he has a business in Freeport. And Howard Stern went on the radio and said that um, this guy who's bigger than me, which told me to stop. And then there was another time that Howard Stern was making fun of our cousin, William B. Williams, who's a famous disc jockey and creator of the Make Believe Ballroom, and he came up with the idea of the Rat Pack. Was friendly with Frank and Dean and all of them, and he said, "Stop making fun of my cousin." And he went on the radio and said, "This guy who has a children's shop in Freeport told me to stop making fun of the cousin, and he's got to listen." So anyway, one more.
So that I'm guessing would be the WNBC era of Howard Stern.
Yeah,
Got
yeah.
it. So, just naturally in conversation, Howard Stern came up, Eddie Murphy came up, Zippy the Chimp, a lot of world famous things related to Freeport, ties to Freeport, etc. Have you encountered anyone or anything related to Freeport in Amherst, Mass?
Um, I mean, I'm kind of a little bit of a muckraker in town, fighting against overdevelopment and turning downtown. And I just went to a meeting this morning where the head of the progressive online paper that I write for said,
Mhm.
"Why don't you write a story about growing retail in Amherst?" So, because I was just telling him about this interview after that meeting. Um, I mean, I think I have had some good impact on some merchants in town, just telling them from my experience. I was the head of the retail division of the Chamber with Larry Grebinar from Irving's Men's Shop. That's who has the Lou Reed story for you. And and I think merchants in every town are kind of thinking that people don't like them, or, that they're fighting an uphill battle. And it was just interesting for me to go in there and just talk about how, some of that they needed to just filter out as their own noise. And if I was 30 years younger, I would definitely open another children's shop. There's something that I really missed about it. And I remember like when Larry Grebinar and I decided to close our stores at the same time. I think we had just finished at the same time. And he
Mhm.
went into real estate and he was like, "I don't need people to come in anymore. Now I can go and find them." And I got a similar job after running a program at UMass Amherst that was education for family businesses. And, that was definitely good. You didn't have to wait for somebody to come in. I think I just mentioned a story to you that I don't want to name names on this one, but, there was a fellow merchant of mine, um, not in Freeport, but in an adjoining town that had what was known as a Chiba store, meaning it looked like a general store, but there was a little slot in the back. You'd put in $5 or $10 and you'd get a little bag of pot for $5 or $10 worth, a nickel or a dime bag. And when I would read in the leader that she got out of jail, I'd write her a note of like, you still have $1,000 left on your layaway, because she had a habit of um, buying clothes for children that her husband had fathered. So that was pretty generous. She was probably one of our best customers. I mean, it just is, it's so funny to just get to know so many people that you would never meet. And so I love that about retail.
And then another name that came up in some of our research is Louis Maniscalco. I believe the tailor shop of the Maniscalcos was almost as old as your family's business. Am I right about that?
Well, that was one of my first jobs when 1959, my father bought the store and I would go in with him sometimes. And so I was 6, and it was
Hmm.
part of my job to bring the pants for shortening or the waist being taken in to Louis's store that was behind. And he was really a very, very nice man. And I ended up at the end of the story is when he retired, I bought his machines, and I think I altered 30,000 pairs of pants on the straight stitch and a million others on the. I was actually once introduced at a family business talk where they said everybody knows everybody here. So what can we say about you that nobody knows? And it would be like I stopped counting at 30,000 pairs of pants, mostly for Holy Redeemer and Queen of the Most Holy Rosary. Um, but very nice man, and we would do a little barter of, whatever it was for a cuff, 250. Now it's probably $20 for a cuff at a tailor. We would take it off the rent, which I'm sure was low. And after I had introduced myself to Regina Feeney of the Library and Historical Society, she was like, I just met his grandson, Dean Maniscalco, just came in this morning. And we traded stories and we decided that we probably had met each other because it was his job to like write up a sales ticket and give it, and we're about the same age. So yeah, that was great. I'm a big fan of Sebastian Maniscalco. I have no idea if that's a relationship.
Yeah, every now and then I'm seeing that last name come up. There's a publicist that I've arranged interviews for, Linda Maniscalco. I don't know
Mhm.
if it's a common last name or it's just coincidental, but the Freeport Rec Center I know has been a touchstone of networking, not just fitness and recreation. Did that play into the family business at all? Do you remember when that was built?
I think it was built when I was there. I used to go swim laps on occasion. Again, I grew up on the North Shore, but once I was swimming and I crashed into my sixth grade teacher, who I only remember that he used to pick his nose and pick his ears, and I crashed into him and he was picking his nose and his ears. He lived in Freeport. Um, but yeah, I was on the, I think I used to go to meetings there. I was on the Freeport Arts Council board, mostly assigned to get ads from retailers. And we had meetings there. No, that was a big point of pride for the village for sure.
Was the Arts Council even back then on Merrick Road near the rec center?
I don't even remember a meeting place. I remember it was Lila Derringer ran it, and then we hired her daughter Lissy. She was a great salesperson for us for a while when she was in high school, and yeah, I remember that being a good force in town.
Was that Derringer by any chance? Liz Derringer, who is married to Rick Derringer, who I know is originally from Oceanside, or are there two people with a similar name?
The musician Rick Derringer? No, well,
Yes,
she grew up
Liz.
Derringer. She grew up Derringer. I don't know. I don't know if there's a relation. I didn't know he was a Long Islander. That's interesting.
He wasn't, but his ex-wife Liz Derringer, she had a
Oh,
different name growing up
that's
with her
not
mother
her.
side.
She grew up Derringer. Yeah.
Got it. So I think I read also that when they dug up Main Street around the Freeport Mall, they
Yeah.
found a road underneath it. Is that true?
Yeah.
Or something you've heard
Yeah.
about?
No, I remember that. So, it was always South Main Street, and then there was money to be had to dig up and build these, what they used to call a pedestrian promenade mall. Um, by the time I came into the business in 76, it was already fait accompli. I mean, I came in as they were starting to chop up the street. And I remember it was like finding gold. And there's gold in them hills. There's a clamshell road fully intact under
Sure.
this other road, which I'm sure was such sloppy road building back then to just not make a firmer foundation than just put it on. But yeah, they just found it totally clamshells. Um, it was interesting, just a related story to that. I remember there was a guy, I'm not going to give his name. He worked for the village and he bought a house for $10,000 through homesteaders. And he found that the entire house was lined with Prohibition rum. So just talk about digging up the old. And he goes like, it did not take long for his family to just knock off the entire house of rum as they were renovating.
Well, that kind of reminds me about the secret tunnels that people have found in Brooklyn that that
Yeah,
you'll sometimes see the Orthodox coming in and
for
out
the
of.
rabbis to escape. Yeah.
Well, is that a thing of early Jewish communities or early Jewish settlers where they realized
I
they
don't
had to have
know. I
escape
don't
plans
know.
or just a coincidence?
I think it was one of those seemed like a good idea at the time kind of things.
So something that you mentioned earlier is that Jews really could not own property back then the way that they could now, obviously, as regular people. And I know there's that country club in Oceanside, which did not accept Jewish members for a lot of years, allegedly. But what was the political climate like for Harry and the family? Was it as restrictive as I'd imagine it would be?
I am not an expert in that. I heard a bunch of stories about the good old days, um, and it did not seem like they were feeling oppressed. It felt like they thought that things were going swell, and Freeport was a strong retail economy back then. People went to
Mhm.
Freeport as opposed to the years I was there that, we had customers from all over the place. And I think we had a much wider trading circle than a lot of other stores because aside from a couple of, QMHR and HRS, we had Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. We sold more Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts than J.C. Penney's, which was the biggest retailer of that.
Wow.
And and we had suits and dresses, communion, christening, like we had a lot of special occasion clothing. So we would draw people in from wealthier towns that would not go to other stores. And in our time, they would say, could you put it in a plain paper bag or could you help me find my car? Every so often it would be like, my car was stolen. My husband's going to kill me. And then I would go out and find the car in another parking lot and they go like, oh yeah, I've parked it over here. So, it was hard to advertise that kind of stuff. We did have meetings in the back a lot. They were probably illegal meetings, thinking back of just like the mayor and the assistant mayor and a couple of trustees and a couple of merchants. And I would say, and the publisher of Newsday would come to the back of my store. And I would have made a collection of articles. I wrote three plays, and one of them was about me and my father. And this is a scene in the play where I point out that this article in Newsday, no offense to modern day Newsday, um, said Freeport man had $5,000 cash stolen from him. And it turns out that he was in a pizzeria in Valley Stream and announced that he won $5,000 and was held up by the guy at the next table with a fork. And and I was saying this headline should say "Man robbed in Valley Stream." This is actually I'm repeating lines from my play now, but so we would just stand up for that. Um, it was a rough situation to get people to come.
Sure. Kind of tying in with the political nature or climate is often the police. And I think I read also that there was a customer of yours who was a policeman who wrote novels that somehow tied in with Steven Seagal movies. Do I have that correct?
Yeah. So I met John Westerman when I was new in the store as an adult. Again, I worked there through my childhood. Um, I was driving around Villa Rose on Merrick Road. I was brand new to the business, and I'm driving probably like 20, 25 miles an hour. And there's a knocking on my window, and he says, John Westerman yells, uh, "I'm commandeering your vehicle. Police in distress. I know who you are." And I pulled over, and he got in and sped off. And I read about it the next day that he was saving a police in distress, and there was German shepherds attacking him and all kinds of stuff. And he would get punished for things like car crashes and, by standing in front of my store, which was where to stand on post one. So I got to know him a little bit. And he wrote a novel. He wrote two novels that did star Steven Seagal, not my favorite action hero. Um, but that was about Freeport, even though I think they moved it to some other town, but it was clearly about Freeport, making fun of the police chief and making fun of all kinds of stuff. He was also the son of one of the wealthiest industrialists on Long Island, so he grew up being a cop. I'm sure that was pleasing to the father that he made a movie and not that he was a policeman. But he was,
Yeah, I could look this up, but any idea if this was earlier Steven Seagal work, like Under Siege and Above the Law, or later stuff like all the movies that get made just for the Russian market?
I think those are the movies
Oh, really? So earlier Steven Seagal,
early
prominent Steven
before he
Seagal.
became a Buddhist enlightened master.
We could talk a lot about Steven Seagal off the record another
Yeah.
time. I don't want to get harmed. But
Yeah.
back to you and what we're talking about. You mentioned Villa Rosa, and I didn't grow up in Freeport, but isn't that a restaurant that was there right over the hill, right past the Meadowbrook Parkway into Freeport?
Yeah. No, it was a great restaurant. I can't, I actually just saw a very decrepit picture of it. So I think the building is still standing, according to some post on Facebook that I saw. But yeah, it was the great Italian restaurant. The famous, like they had these little garlic knots. I could easily just fill up on bread and a beer, and I didn't do that. I ate the meal, but yeah, no, that was great. And I was vegetarian when I first started there,
Sure.
so not even eating on wood cleft, unless they happened to make corn in ham sauce and clam water, and then I would drink that and rationalize.
So you have that right there early into Freeport, and then you go a block and a half down when you fork, and what's now BJ's Wholesale. Years before was Caldor. Years before that
Two
was
guys.
Freeport
So
Stadium. Do
we
you remember
fought.
going?
Oh yeah. Well, I remember Freeport Stadium. I don't remember going to Freeport Stadium. I remember the fan base of Freeporters. I didn't grow up in Freeport, but I know about Freeport Stadium. But also, I did fight two guys when they first came in, um, and they were promising all kinds of things. I did actually go in there a couple of times and say like. That's why my shoplifting is down. Two guys hired all my shoplifters. So there was a lot of crime going on, and that's like people paying $1 and getting a paid sticker on a cash, on a big appliance or something. But you know, the complaining that we did at Village Hall, we fund your little leagues. I mean, that stuff never ends. Um, so, we did our share of that. And then I even remember there was one time that I was on vacation in some sunny spot in February, and my father called me to say, we just had a spy that looks just like Magnum PI come in the store. And he wanted a layette, but he was clearly full of shit. He didn't know anything about a layette, what you get for the newborn. And and then I got him to admit that he was a private eye sent by Alan Fortunoff. I had written a letter to Newsday criticizing Alan Fortunoff for saying that he was saying that Westbury is the downtown of Long Island and all towns should, lick Westbury's boots. And it was like, you clearly don't know Long Island. So he came in to find out who I was. So I was a little happy when they failed. Um,
Well, it sounds like, and you'll tell me if I have this wrong, it sounds like your local competitors, it was still a family situation. It was a local industry. You would send each other business whether or not you meant to, but then someone like Fortunoff was coming in and kind of killing off Freeport.
well, I don't think that Fortunoff's was my children's wear competitor, but they were just trying to suck the life out of all the downtowns, which there's, I forget how many, but hundreds. Um, and Local competitors, I mean, there were people that are still in business that uh, people would come in and they'd say, um, I don't want to say the name, but they would say, "Oh, this other store had it at 70% off," and my father would say, "Why didn't you buy it?" They were out of it. And so when we're out of it, it's half price. So there were a lot of fake discounts. But then there were other competitors, Lobel's in Massapequa. I could call them up and say, could I borrow a dozen infant and a dozen toddler boys sailor suits in blue and white and send and have them drop ship back to you? Like that was easy. Neither of us felt threatened by it. We just recommended back and forth. They didn't have to say, oh, are they still in business? It's just, yeah. Anyway, we
Yeah.
had we had our friends.
Did you find that back in the day that most of the business for the family business came through word of mouth and or penny saver kind of advertising?
Well, we did a lot with Penny Saver. Um, and Dora was in our store constantly, the main salesperson. And at the time, Roger Roddy and his family shopped in our store. So we were loyal to Penny Saver. I would be the person, not Dora, no offense to Dora, I would be the person who would put together the 20-page, 100,000 home circulars and have to go up and down the street for free and say, do you want your usual quarter page or would you prefer to be left out? And they
Hmm.
would say, I'll take a quarter page. And I would say, then give me $160 or whatever it was. And then I would hand over all these checks and all this copy to the Penny Saver. And it's like, I should really be working for Penny Saver. No offense to Penny Saver. I also found out that a retail store. I study business or anything. I learned it all piece by piece, that a retail store can comfortably pay 2% of their volume in advertising and marketing. And, I pushed that up towards the 2%. And so we would occasionally even be in the Sunday New York Times or something like that. And, my father would always want to put in like, tell us how you heard about it. It's like, you don't
Yeah.
say that in the New York Times, like, and people don't remember anyway, what radio station. Oh, and then I would make these minute-long radio station ads for the chamber retail division that everybody wanted their name mentioned or they wouldn't contribute their $20 or whatever. So I just remember making one that I just had this voice, the guy just go like, this is a list for instead of this is a test. This is a list for the next 60 seconds. We're going to just tell you all these names of stores. And then I just had them speed read through all the stores on the street. And then that was the commercial. And then people couldn't complain and it was kind of funny. It was so horrible that it was funny, I thought. I don't know if it's business or not.
Um, so what I'm hearing about you and the different roles you played, you are a creative person who came into the family business of sorts. I find, and you'll tell me if I have this very wrong, Ira, but a lot of people who are in a family business, they learn the numbers, they learn the strategies, they learn their roles, but they're not people who could write plays or do cartoon oriented things. So, are you a creative person that was kind of forced into the family business and then found a way to combine all your skills into multiple jobs and multiple professions?
Well, first of all, I grew up with my father saying this thing to me that was kind of confusing, um, which was, if all else fails, there's always the family business, which I took to mean, if you're a failure, I'll welcome you here. And if you do come in here, it means you're a failure. So I really felt bad about that. For a long time, I thought I was a failure. And I've consulted to hundreds of family businesses now, and I have felt like that's not such an uncommon thing. They maybe not the exact same words, but feeling like my parents built the opposite of a meritocracy, and anybody with a brain is a dentist or a lawyer or whatever, not me. And I didn't plan on going into that business. I did like the way that my father could sell. He was a very charming, persuasive, hard sell person, and I was a very soft sell person. And we got very good at tag team wrestling, where one of us would just yell, uh, I got that thing, and I would just come out, and I would realize that this person that my father had just kind of abused needed to be treated nicely for a few minutes and then close the deal. Um, and there were other people that I needed to get him to come out, like as nice as I
Sure.
was or whatever. So, yeah, I grew up admiring my father in the business. My mother also worked there, very organized, like, and I have to say, I benefited from working with my parents. I think I matured in my relationship with my parents over 17 years. I saw my flaws in them and their flaws in me, and it really helped me a lot. And it really was a good education for advising family businesses. Um, I forgot the question.
Well, I was complimenting your multifaceted
Oh,
approach,
yeah.
but building on that, it sounds like you wouldn't have been able to find your footing with consulting for small businesses and the like had you not had the family end of it. But at the same time, you take a creative approach in your other endeavors. So you figured out a way to honor the family roots, honor the Freeport history, but at the same time, be a creative individual for a living.
Well, so when I got out of college, I majored in elementary education because I don't know why, I just had a calling. I don't know what I felt, something accurate. And I ran a K to 6 hippie free school in Buffalo that I had student taught in and walked into a job. So my first thing of ed, and then I closed the school because the city of Buffalo had opened this project that's still open. It's called Waterfront School. It was
Mhm.
open classroom. Open classrooms are so passé now, but it was the next big thing back then. And they gave us right of first refusal. So I closed the school and planned on working in Barasch's only for the summer. And that lasted 17 years. So I really had no plans on staying there. But back to the creative, my mother was a drawing and painting student at NYU, and she made hundreds and hundreds of really adorable signs that I wish I had kept. I have a few of them. But she was very creative. And I used to like to come up with all kinds of slogans that actually made it into the play, a million little slogans that I had for the store. Um, yeah, no, I felt like I was creative and I didn't feel stifled by Barasch's either. I really liked it a lot. And as the play points out, um, my father, I think, learned to just relax a little bit, and I learned to be a little bit more organized. We kind of
Hmm.
cross paths in the middle. And yeah, I think it was a good experience. And I definitely think it informed me being a family business person, but also being a family business person helped me realize how well I got along with my parents overall. My father and I both had sisters and no brothers, and I think we both became brothers to each other. Um, my mother was, I love my mother dearly, but she was a difficult person, and I think I understood her better than anybody else that ever lived. So it was a good thing.
So going back, Buffalo. Oh, around what years was Buffalo for you?
I went to Penn State in 71 and Buffalo in 72, and I stayed there till 76. So I graduated from college and then stayed another year of teaching and then came.
Okay, so that predated Rick James Buffalo. I was going to tie in a Freeport thing. If if Buffalo happened to be 3 years later, we were going to have a perfect Freeport tie-in.
But I think that who was very popular in Buffalo when I was up there was the music producer Harvey Weinstein.
Yes, yes, that is
Yeah.
true. Harvey Weinstein, I think Brad Gray
Yeah.
were
Hard.
entertainment promoters, and a
Yeah.
lot. Now, I don't know much about Buffalo. I just know from being in Niagara Falls a couple of days, and a lot of Long Islanders that I grew up with all went to SUNY Buffalo, that kind of a thing. Was Buffalo another kind of city that was like the Paris of this region until all the factories closed?
I loved Buffalo, and I actually drove there last year. I visited friends from here to Buffalo. Um, it's a desolate city. I mean, it's sad what has happened, and they were hoping to be part of a knowledge corridor. Yeah, but I loved it there. I mean, I really felt like it was a good home for me. I could talk about it for hours, but one interesting thing is we my school was in the basement of a church in Midtown in central Buffalo, and I went to visit this last visit, a Frank Lloyd Wright house that had been restored right across the street from the school. And I said to the guide, "How did I not know that? We used to play soccer on the front lawn of the church like every day with the kids." And he'd be
Right.
like, it was covered by shrubbery in the 70s. Like you would have just think it was a huge tangle, which I also can't remember. But it was just so amazing that there were efforts after to make Buffalo better. I stayed on Allen Street, which was like the Greenwich Village of Buffalo, and it was really hard hit by COVID and retirements, and they dug the street up and ran out of money. It's sad.
Well, back to Freeport. Did I read correctly that you once put together a travel guide for Freeport, a
Yeah.
glossy guide of sorts? When
Yeah.
was that?
Um, I think it was probably around 1980. I was a director. My father was always a director of the chamber and the head of the retail division and on and off with other. And I became a director of the chamber. And then they were like, what day do you want to go down to Woodcleft and flip burgers and sell beer for 8 hours and 100 degrees? It's like, what else can I do? So I came up with making this guide. So it's a very nice thing. We handed out 10,000 of them, including along the highway tourism booth on Southern State, and
Yeah.
gave them out through realtors. I only have one copy left, but it was very nice. I remember Clinton Metz, who was the village historian, did a big centerfold. Um, and he told me, you know what time of history is always the most forgotten? Now. That's what his answer was. But also, I had the cover was by a high school person. I had a little cash prize for the front cover and the back cover. It was very sweet.
Does that one copy you have exist in digital format?
I sent it to the library. I have not seen it up yet.
Okay, we'll see if we can
Yeah.
locate that, scan it, put it out there, etc. Do you remember anything that you featured within that travel guide? offhand?
I think there was an article about home finders, which is how to buy a house for $10,000. There was an article about the arts center, the history, the rec center. There was a lot of advertising, the chamber, why we're the fishing and boating capital of the East. It was promotional, but it was well written. Um, and people liked it. And it
Mhm.
actually, I had a newsletter when I later ran the UMass Family Business Center that I think that um, my experience in putting that together, just even the cutting and pasting, helped me when it was more like using much more sophisticated stuff.
Well, that's more proof that you were a creative person even back when you were joining into the family business and all
And
that.
I would add
That
this one thing is
yeah.
I also tasked myself with getting entertainment on the mall on the weekends because part of
Oh,
the problem with the mall was that it was officially known, legally known as a sidewalk. So police couldn't tell, junior high ruffians with boom boxes having fun to move on because you're allowed to just stand on the sidewalk. So I would get the showmobile and put an army band in it. I remember Betsy Dickerson's School of Dance did a performance. We had a guy, Shelby. Something that could play 20 games of chess. He played in front of my store simultaneously, won them all. Um, and I would just try to fill it up with entertainment so that people would not say, "What a scary place."
so
Um,
Shelby was on my list of things to ask you about.
yeah.
Sort of a chess legend icon, but underground. When it comes to booking talent like that, these days you just reach out to a talent agent or you put out an inquiry on a listserv and you go, "We want to book this. Who's got that?" How would you find talent like that?
Well, running the Family Business Center for 25 years, I hired many hundreds of speakers. Proudly, I got many of them down from 30 to 50,000 down to 1 or 2,000. And I don't know about Shelby Lyman, but buying 80 copies of their book from 1-800 CEO book that counts towards the New York Times best-selling list, giving to their favorite charity. There's all kinds of ways. Telling them other people that fell for the same gambit that I was pulling. I had several people that stood up in the Family Business Center and said, I get $50,000. I don't know what the heck I'm doing here for $2,000. And I got a standing ovation from the membership of family businesses. So I would just go to Shelby. I just asked him, you're a local person. There was another guy, Richard, somebody whose son was in Annie Hall. He had the line in Annie, Richard, I'm forgetting his name, but the son said in Annie Hall, I used to be a heroin addict, but now I'm a methadone addict. So we had the father's theater school come and perform. I would just ask people. And my father would always say in Yiddish, that I can't remember the Yiddish, if you don't ask, you don't get. So I would ask.
So there's a lot of elements to the family business that had nothing to do with what you were selling. So, for example, the Barasch bucks about people being able to redeem for toys to keep the people happy on that end. The putting entertainment outside the mall, keeping people happy on that end. It sounded like your job with the family business never ended. You were never off the clock. And again, so much of it wasn't the inventory.
Well, I mean, now being somebody who's consulted to businesses is the idea of a social entrepreneur. That usually somebody who's an entrepreneur in business is also coaching the team and standing on,
Sure.
looking on the town board and all kinds of stuff like that. So, I just felt like a good citizen. I mean, it was weird being such a good citizen in Freeport during that time when I really was some from the North Shore. I remember when I lived on Brooklyn Avenue and there was some fire at 2 in the morning that everybody was out watching the fire on Sunrise Highway, and somebody went running back in the house and brought something out dripping wet and soapy that she said, I'm busy tomorrow, so can you take this back for me that I want to return it? And it'd be like, there's something nice about a line between life and business.
Do you ever notice how many Freeport stories of landmarks involve? So when the fire burnt it down,
Yeah.
it's just so many things. But on a more positive note, the Chamber of Commerce, did they play a lot into the family business?
Well, I think at the time there were 30 directors and most of them were not retail. So, retailers find it harder to go to Rotary and Chamber and things like that because they're
Right.
minding the store. So it was a lot more bankers, realtors. I mean, the way it's always been. So, we were involved. Nat from B&N was involved. Julie's from Weber's was involved. Larry from, but it was more the mainstay, old fashioned. Um, it wasn't so much the newcomers, whatever they were.
Got it. In general, was the mayor or the village heavily involved in the business, or just pretty much for paying taxes and that? And the reason I ask this, sometimes you find out that local government plays an instrumental role in keeping businesses afloat in the local economy. And then other times you find out you never even meet the mayor or the village people, aside from when there's money due.
Well, I was very involved in village meetings, and I've continued that in Amherst. I would go and complain regularly, and my thing, which I hope people will see if they ever hear me complain, was to be neighborly and not to be an asshole. And when I came to Amherst, it was amazing to go to town hall and see like Central Casting did the same job here that they did in Amherst. There was the guy that, whacked his papers and never read what he wrote. There's the guy that you could see his rear end with his pants, the guy that videotaped everything. Uh,
Sure.
and so I was glad. I've been in a few, fights up here that I won, to just kind of be neighborly to the point that, well, whatever. I'm getting lost in that, but um, we would have meetings in the back of my store sometimes. Bill White, um, and Bill White, when I was there, it went from Bill White being a part-time, what's called, not him personally, but what's called a weak mayor, to a full-time strong mayor. I'm not characterizing him as weak or strong. It's just, and
Right.
and then Dorothy Storm was a strong mayor. So, I think back then, I don't know what it is now, there was the Republican Party that was the kind of Freeport, I forgot what it's called. Then there was the Home Rule Party that was kind of the puppet of the Democrats. So campaigns were really kind of dirty. I remember people that ran for office that moved out of town the day after the election because they had been outed as like you were never in the army, like you claimed or whatever. It was nasty to just control a little village, but also, I don't know about now, but it was also known that Freeport was kind of a puppet um, of the county, and that Freeport was the place that was welfare dumping or whatever it was. That there was some complicity in some of the problems in the redlining. There's been a lot of redlining stuff over the years. So, and even when I would hear, like, I would never live in Freeport because of all the drug activity in the Northeast. And then you'd hear from cops that I knew, it's like a lot of the drug activity in the Northeast are BMWs from Great Neck. So, it's not like the buyer is from here. So, yeah, it was a rough town.
So, of course, everyone is nostalgic for different eras of their life, and they only remember the good things that happened, and they couldn't compartmentalize and all that. Was there anything that you miss from the Freeport era of your life?
I miss the feelings. It's funny because I'm not really like a big holiday person, but it felt like Christmas when I was little. The street, I mean, I was little, and I also helped the window trimmer put in all the Christmas decorations in the window. And,
Sure.
so, but Christmas felt like a season. I mean, especially to retail, it's a season. Um, it felt like on a busy day, my father has four older sisters. The four older sisters and their husbands would all come and mind the store. So, my Aunt Rose, Sally, Faye, and Esther would make all kinds of Jewish delicatessen stuff and feed everybody all day long. At night, even when I was little, I'd kind of get drunk on sherry hearing, whatever the hell it is. And, there was just and just my Uncle Lou, who would just sit by the front door, supposedly dissuading shoplifters, but he would just be doing the New York Times crossword puzzle in ink and, just like not minding the store. I miss all of that. So, I miss realizing like, okay, Christmas is over. Now we're going into winter doldrums and putting spring away. And then the guy would come, who my father always referred to as the Undertaker, forget his name, but he would just buy everything that was in the basement and ship it to Africa. And I remember him shipping like dozens of Fonzie for President 1976 shirts to Africa and just feeling sorry for Africa. Um, though Fonzie turned out to be pretty great. And
Yeah.
and yeah, no, I have a lot of memories. I remember selling paper dresses. I must have been like 10 years old, and there was like a gay 90s. I don't know what year that was, but I was out selling, I had a big mustache and a little brim straw hat and selling paper dresses for $1. And I remember the parade would come down and, some Christmassy figure would be throwing candy out. Freeport was and I've seen old videos on this of like super old parades down Freeport. It does seem like it was a town that people would really be lining the streets for parades.
Your answer went in a different direction from what I was expecting. Because most people I find who move out of state go, I miss the bagels, I miss the pizza. That's usually the first topic that comes up.
I miss
Yeah,
V-Brox.
yeah. Can
I
you
miss
get that?
V-Brox. There was KFC, Southern Fried Chicken was in V-Brox. I miss Glenn's, that was on the corner of Sunrise Highway. I still have a couple of things that he gave me when he closed, of like a guy from one picture frame drinking a root beer out of the other picture frame. And he always had the cellar door open, and he had a bum leg, so he would go like every 2 seconds he'd be like swinging his leg over the door so he wouldn't fall into the basement. The Ranger, Texas Ranger. I would
Yeah.
go in there. Perry, this muscle-bound son of Texas Ranger, he would say, "Hey, babe," and then he would put down a tomato juice, a little salad, and Frankfurter, and it'd be like, "I didn't want this." He goes, "Like, you got to tell me before I get it." It's like I came in 3 seconds ago, but they were fast. I was, yeah, I could go on. I have a million of them.
Wait, please do.
Okay, I remember the time I used to work all day long for $5. So I worked all day long making boxes and sweeping and changing mannequins and waiting on people, and took my $5 and went to cross Sunrise Highway to go to this little store on the way to the Ranger, but it was like near Long Island Trust. And I got hit by a car that went through a red light. I won $5,000. I think that would have been like $1 million today. I broke 2 ribs, had a severe concussion. Um, the official village photographer, Victor's or what something, took my picture. He was like right next to me. So I have a picture of myself lying in the middle of Sunrise Highway, and they said that I went flying up in the air and landed on my head. So yeah, no, I had a lot of memories, and then I woke up in Doctor's Hospital, just to connect it to one other little story with Dr. Frank Varmus, whose family lived above my store. He's father of Harold Varmus, who grew up above the store before they moved to Oceanside, and he won the Nobel Prize for his findings in cancer that now they teach in junior high, but at the time he discovered how cancer cells replicate. Um, so that was kind of famous. My father was the main quoted person in the correction in Newsday of like, no, he didn't grow up in Oceanside. He grew up in Freeport and then moved to Oceanside, said Bill Brick. So
Well, in terms of people from around here, they tend to have which beaches they prefer. In other words, North Shore people will go, oh, we want the rocks-based beaches in Ashroken because we don't know how those Beach people do that. And other people go, why would you go to Jones Beach when you have Long Beach? Do you remember which was your local beach of choice growing up when you weren't working?
well, I think for some unknown reason, West End 2 was known as kind of the mysterious, sexy beach. And when I lived in Wantaw, got married, bought a house in Wantaw Woods, and my son, who's now in his late 30s, was, 4 or 5 years old, we would frequently meet. My wife would bring dinner down, and we'd meet at West End 2, and it would be all of the pigeons picking at the garbage and all the trucks cleaning the beach and us picnicking there midway. So I think West End 2 was always known as kind of the more, and my father used to sell hot dogs. If I could fit this one story in, my
Please.
father, I was saying before, my father was friendly with William B. Williams, who's his cousin. William Breitbart is his name, from Lindenhurst. And Bill Breitbart was his actor brother, who only was in like kind of B movies, action movies. That William B. and my father would sell frankfurters together in a stand in Jones Beach, before it was a state park. and that William B. was a kidder, and would, if some big, kind of jerky guy would say, "I want a Frank with everything on it," and cut in line, that William B. would put the Frank in the roll, put everything on top, and then pull the Frank out and give the guy, and then the guy would come try to jump over, and my father would be standing there with knives, was the story. Um, so that's how they got to be friendlier.
Wow. And you said the last name Breitbart. Any relation to the political
I don't
legend?
think so. I don't think they're Jewish even.
You never know what has origins to Long Island. Did you watch the recent Billy Joel 5 hour documentary on
No, I want to
HBO?
see that. I want to see that.
It alternately paints Long Island as this place that had nothing going on and everything going on. And there was a song on Billy Joel's '93 album River of Dreams called No Man's Land, which really paints Long Island as having nothing going on until they developed it. Did you feel growing up like there was nothing going on out here?
Well, first of all, I remember hearing about Billy Joel when he was in, I think, Hicksville High School and I was in Herrick's High School, of like, there's this amazing band a few towns away. I didn't
Was that
drive.
the Hassles?
Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure. Years later, I tried to get into this street that had private guards saying nobody drives down the street because Mr. Joel lives here. So I guess he moved up in the world.
Yeah.
But I moved to Searingtown from West Hempstead. West Hempstead was a little town that when I was 5, we bought in Searingtown, was a new block. And I remember when we first looked at the house, there was a couple of horses on the land before it was all divided up. And then there was a lake, and then the lake became like kind of a storm basin, and the
Yeah.
horses were gone, and every tree had one property. I felt like Long Island was new. Um, I remember then hearing about, like, there's this little piece of the old Motor Parkway. It's like Long Island has like a prehistory to it, and then
Yeah.
just finding out about the Great Gatsby and all the prehistory of Long Island. But yeah, no, I remember when it was pretty undeveloped. I remember Roosevelt Field when it wasn't covered. I remember getting Dr. Seuss's autograph on my Yertle the Turtle, which disappeared shortly after, before they put a cover on Roosevelt Field.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned West Hempstead. Do you remember the Garden Arena?
Yeah, so Peter, Paul, and Mary there when I was in like elementary school. And then we ate out before the concert. My mother and my sister ate out next to Mary and a friend. So yeah,
Wow.
it was a big deal. That
And
was a,
then Calderon Hall would have been close to there. Is that a place that you went to?
what's the name?
Calderon Hall?
I don't know that one. I don't know that
It's
one.
now currently a mega church of some sort, but it was
Oh,
a concert venue that was originally a movie theater. And do you remember other concert venues of the time in these surrounding
well, I
towns?
remember I mean, it's not so old, but the Westbury Music Fair, I saw the Doors there and Theater in the Round. I remember Jim Morrison. Um, this girl ran onto the stage, and then he ran up one of the aisles into his dressing room, and she ran in after him, and then came out, that he was like, he punched me in the stomach. He punched me in the stomach, and then she realized, like, Jim punched me, and everybody's like trying to touch her stomach as Jim punched her, and he split his leather pants during Unknown Soldier. So I remember that. I remember seeing what's her name from the Wizard of Oz died.
Judy Garland,
Judy Garland's daughter, who I'm not remembering her name, not
Liza Minnelli.
Liza Minnelli in concert at Westbury Music Fair. And the night that Judy Garland died, we heard on the way out. Yeah, there was like nice old places, drive-ins, I remember.
Do you remember a concert venue called the Action House?
No.
That was in Island Park. Part of my digging, I keep finding that there was all these concert venues in Island Park that were connected to Phil Basile. Do you remember that name? He worked. Henry Hill worked for him in the source of Goodfellas and all that. Was any of that around, or do you just?
I remember my father's place was in Roslyn, which I think reopened now in the new Roslyn
Yes,
Hotel.
yes.
And yeah, where else did I go? I used to go to the Fillmore was open my 3 years of high school, so I was allowed to go to the Fillmore with usually the biggest pot dealer in Herrick's High School and his father driving in a big old Woody. So Yeah, I think I remember going when the comedy scene was good. There was the one that Richard M. Dixon owned, the White
The
House.
White House Inn.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
remember that. I remember Eddie Murphy when he was an unknown. Yeah.
So in your case, you remember seeing Eddie Murphy before he made it, and then right after he made it on SNL
Yeah.
here in Freeport.
When he hit it on SNL, when he went from annoying to one of the main people. And then I
Got
think
it.
he lived near Joe Piscopo in New Jersey.
Joe Piscopo, I think, played a couple of weeks ago in Lynbrook or Franklin Square at a park or something like that. Were there park concerts back then?
Uh, I'm sure there were. Well, I remember going to events on the water. Again, I didn't live in Freeport, so sometimes we didn't go to things there, but we did go to chamber things and all of that. I don't know that one.
I'm sure you were also way too busy with all the things we talked about, which weren't in the job description, but being about a community pillar,
Yeah.
that it's not like you were going, what concert am I going to tonight? But what I'm hearing is it sounds like there was a vibrant restaurant scene of sorts in Freeport for the occasions you go to that. There was a vibrant concert scene for the couple of times a year you'd go to that. That it wasn't boring. It wasn't isolated out here
I
by any
think on
means.
stage was an active disco up until around the time that I started, but I remember they were saying that it was very crowded and the floor was still slanted from when it was a movie theater and the bar was at the bottom of the slant. So as people were dancing, they were going down to the bar more. But that was more of a unoccupied property for most of the time that I was there. Then we went through the Blockbuster era. Um, and then there was the time that Jack Kahn came in. So we thought there was going to be a big anchor store of this big piano guy. And then there was a guy, Joe Shekel, that came around, Israeli guy. He was going to build on the Grants block, all this stuff. Then he kind of disappeared. I don't know what happened to him. Um, yeah, there were a few people that we thought were going to be saviors.
Got it. Another landmark I'd like to ask you about, Nunley's. Do you have memories related to Nunley's?
I went there when my son was small, and we have cousins that still live in Baldwin Harbor that their son is. So we went there mostly as that. I grew up going to Adventureland. I went to Freedom Land. Freedom Land was like kind of a New York City corruption scandal turned into an amusement park. That, if you read about that, there's a lot of corruption in that one. Um, yeah. I don't, so, but Nunley's was more of an afterthought. Adventureland, I think, was where you would have birthday parties on Route 110.
Got it. So, in terms of this area, another staple of sorts, and I'm curious for your take on it, Nathan's. Did that play into special occasions? Because that's kind of between where you grew up around Herrick's High School and Freeport.
Wait, so Nathan's meaning where on Sunrise Highway? Is
There
that what
was
you?
the Nathan's in Oceanside, which I think was the second
Oh, oh,
Nathan's.
oh, okay. Yeah. I don't remember being influenced by Nathan's. I did. My son lives in Coney Island now, so I've been to that Nathan's. Um, Yeah, not that affected by it. I remember when there was Wetsons. I don't know what's there now. It was a Dunkin' Donuts on Sunrise Highway near where Blockbuster was. But I remember going with this sales girl who was 16 when I was probably 10, that we would cross the street to get Wetsons burgers for like 15 cents or something for everybody in the store. And then years later, when we lived in Wanton, my son went to Bethpage Nursery School. That 16-year-old had grown up, and she was kind of an advocate for the book, How to Listen So Kids Will Talk and Talk So Kids Will Listen. And she was like, my nickname growing up was Buddy. A lot of my family still calls me Buddy. And
Mhm.
and she was like, Buddy, we used to go to Wetson's together. And so it was interesting. She also revealed that when she was a lonely teenager with all kinds of problems that her parents wouldn't understand, that she could tell my father, and my father was a great listener. And it would be like, my father's a great listener. But he was a good listener. But
Sure.
it was just funny to see. It was just funny to see him in a role of being kind of a mentor to a younger person, which I never pictured.
Um, Not what we're talking about necessarily, but you mentioned the Dunkin' Donuts. That was the Blockbuster, that region, and that's across the street from the Long Island Railroad stop. What was it like taking the train into Manhattan in the 70s, 80s, early 90s?
Well,
Is
it
it
was
like it
42
is now?
minutes. It was 42 minutes. Um, it was, I mean, I remember a lot of comedians at the time would instantly identify themselves as a South Shore of Long Island because they would know every stop on the Babylon line. But there were times, I mean, I went in to buy. My parents were very different in the way they bought. My mother bought infant, toddler, and girls, 4 to 14, and my father bought just 4 to 20 boys, and we also had Huskies and Portleys and Slims. And my mother would take so long to buy everything. She would go through, every item of the stitches are not right and this and I remember like baby togs would take her 8 hours. And then I went and I bought baby togs. It took me 2 hours. And it'd be like, what am I missing? And it would be like, you're missing criticizing every garment that you don't want. 2 hours is how long it does take. So it was interesting to go into the city. I could knock things off in half a day. After half a day, my brain was fried, too much buying. And then I would go like hang out in the village, or there was an all-you-could-eat Indian place in the Hotel Pennsylvania. Um, but there were sometimes like we had a big black clientele and they were very fashion conscious of certain things needed to be certain ways. So there was a item called Swedish knit pants. They were like triple knit, like when double knits were popular. They were really shiny, not comfortable. And they had
Uh-huh.
like either little plackets down, so it'd be like burgundy with a little black placket, and then a gold stripe, and then the next week 2 gold stripes, next week 3 gold stripes. So many times I would be taking back the 2 gold stripes on the Long Island Railroad, give them back to them to put a third stripe in, and then take and then put them all back, and I'd have to get like you know 10 eights, 12 tens, this many 12s, this many slims, and then just wait for how long it would be till this fashion was out of fashion. Um,
Wow.
so
And
there was a lot of that. Then there was a lot of we sold. I learned a lot about behavioral economics, which is how people make bad choices economically and they leave money on the table. Um, but we would have boy suits that were like $55. And then we'd have boy suits that were like $150 to $250. So it was like Jonathan Strong. These things didn't have a stitch on them. They were all glued together, all polyester, you know, the like cheap buttons, and they would sell like hotcakes. And a lot of times they would sell to the wealthier people because they'd say, I just paid the florist this much and I paid the musician this much and I don't have money left for the kid. So even though it was the kid's event, put $55 suit. And then I'd get somebody from the AME Methodist Church, African Mescal. This is our affordable luxury. This is our son goes to church every Sunday. We want the $200 Jeffrey Bean or Yves Saint Laurent or Pierre Cardin suit. We want him to look like something. And I really learned a lot about that. And then also, I have to say, we had several young men that lived in Down syndrome group homes, and they would come in for portly suits because I knew how to do a waist and seat. I could take in the waist and seat. I could do it a little unevenly. I could shorten one leg little different than the other. I could do one sleeve by hand a little different than the other. And then
mhm.
there was one guy who must be in his 60s now, Nicky, who was probably in his late teens. And I would put the suit on him, and he lived with his parents who were kind of well-to-do. And I put the suit on him, and he'd look in the mirror, and he knew he looked amazing in this suit, and everything fit him right. And he would give me a big hug. That felt really good. And you can't really advertise that, but word spread around of like if you have a son with Down syndrome who's kind of unevenly proportioned, Buddy can do it. So that was an odd little skill I made.
Sure. Well, one last topic because we're eventually going to tape a part two. Is
Okay.
you, the human being, Ira, playwright again, cartoonist. There's the ebook. There's the consulting. What are you up to nowadays? Like, fill me in on everything that's the latest and the greatest, and where people should go to learn more about you and what you do.
Well, I mean, I have a website that's kind of all inclusive of irabryck.com, IRABRYCK. Um, the project I'm working on right now is the ebook about aging humans. So I like to make cartoons, but I draw like a 10-year-old. So I've hired cartoonists to make family business cartoons. I hack around on PowerPoint, but AI is like I think of it as a writing partner. I mean, I'm in discussions with people about whether that's a good thing to think or not. But so I've now made over 50 cartoons about aging that you can see at irabryck.com/complete breakdown, because the book is actually called Aging Humans, A Complete Breakdown. And
Yes.
there's also a lot of questions that you can answer. So I really love doing that. And I walk around with little bookmarks that I made that I hand out at 55 and up places or different kinds of facilities for older people. And I'm also doing some volunteering. So I love volunteering with this organization called E for All, Entrepreneurship for All. So they were founded in Lowell, Mass, which is a town in transition, by a wealthy guy. And then he opened in Holyoke, Mass. That's where I do my stuff. And now it's all over the country. They're opening virtually this November. And basically it's mostly BIPOC startups that are people that are really scrappy, that have a lot of gut feeling for things, work hard, but don't have a lot of business education. So there's
Right.
coursework, which is very practical. There's mentoring. So that's mostly I do mentoring. I read the applications. I interview people to get in the cohort. And there's a bunch of people that volunteer, not just me. But that's been great. And I'm also working with, as soon as they get funding, with another agency. So I do a lot with personality profiles. Um, is one that I use called Hexaco, which was known for years as the Big Five, but then they added a six. So Hexaco is the six. And you could look it up for more information. But so this organization is not working with the top tier STEM underprivileged student, because they say that person will do fine. But the next level down, of the person who has some promise but is not a superstar, disadvantaged economically, STEM interests, I'm going to work with them on resume writing, and so I love volunteering. I would love to just get a check from the government for volunteering. Um, and I'm also considering why I should stick to my guns and not run for town council in a very divisive town. I definitely don't want to, but I might do it anyway. But I'm definitely not wanting to. So that's me.
So irabryck.com and any social media accounts, or just go to the website,
I
and
mean, I
that's
have
the way to
Instagram,
find you.
Facebook, and LinkedIn. I'm all over the place with that.
Well, thank you
My
for
pleasure.
preserving history through the Freeport Memorial Library. Thank you for the
That's
good vibes
part of
you put out into the world here and in Massachusetts, and looking forward to our part two.
Thank you so much.